long before there was organized religion, human beings had an intuitive sense that there was a greater power, that there was God. Long before official church theology, human beings had a personal, direct, and unmediated experience of the divine. This experience is beyond the power of words to describe. But people across all cultures speak of a sense of oneness with the universe, some type of cosmic consciousness, a type of deep knowing. This is the way of the mystic. In this new sermon series at First-Plymouth, we will explore the mystical heart of religion, the truth that the reality of God can be experienced, not simply believed.
We are in Romans chapter 8 today. That was my son, Alex, doing the reading. He is a sophomore at UNL, majoring in economics with a minor in religion. And he is so missing being in class, and I'm thinking so much of all our young ones and all they're missing these days. Anyway, he was happy to come to church and do that reading now. Romans chapter 8, it begins with a phrase that is fascinating. It says, for those who are in Christ. This phrase, in Christ, Paul uses it some 60 times in his epistles, again and again, speaking of those in Christ. Apparently for Paul, he's not talking about people that believe something about Jesus, or even people that are followers of Jesus. He's speaking of some mystical union with the Christ. It's a beautiful phrase. And it's a good place to begin this second part in my sermon series on mysticism. In Romans chapter 8, Paul speaks of a material world and a spiritual realm. And he says that staying connected to the spiritual realm is what will bring life and peace. So now the second part on mysticism. Mysticism being that sense of oneness with all things, being connected to all things. Now, last week, if you remember, I began this series talking about my own mystical experiences. I did that so that we could remember mysticism is common. Lots of people have spiritual experiences. I wanted to democratize mysticism, demystify mysticism. So remember, mysticism is common. Lots of people experience something. Don't have a mystique about a mystic. That's a mistake. Lots of people have these mystical experiences. And I want you to be a mystic. I want you to remember that in these days of solitude and isolation. I want you to remember that you have a deep river of peace within you, that your interiority, your inwardness has a depth and a beauty that connects you. I want you to remember that you have access to a greater power than yourself, within yourself. I know that sounds a little paradoxical, but a lot of religious truth is paradoxical, so hear it again. You have access to a greater power than yourself, within yourself. Oh, in these times of being alone, perhaps we can rediscover our own depths. Also, last week, I was talking about how we imagine religion as a set of beliefs, that being religious is accepting a whole bunch of theological beliefs. But why don't we think of Christianity more as a vehicle that can bring you a direct experience of God? Christianity is not so much a set of beliefs, but a way of life, a manner of consciousness. I know we think of religion as you're supposed to believe something on the authority of someone else or the authority of a book. But my friends, you don't have to take anything on someone else's authority. You can know it for yourself. You can sense the reality of God and the beauty of Christ. I know we think of doctrines in church as something where the official church is saying, you better believe this doctrine. But a doctrine is really a crystallized form of a mystical experience. It's some mystical experience in the past under the high pressure of tradition and church theology. It is formed into a diamond. Like take the Nicene Creed when it speaks of things visible and invisible, light of light, the only begotten Son. It's so mystical. Doctrine isn't something to be held over others. It's an invitation to a connection with God. Well, last week I was also talking about how Jesus was a mystic. But my friends, the Bible is chock full of mystics all throughout. People that had a direct experience of God. Adam and Eve, Abraham, Enoch, Noah, Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael, Jacob, Rebekah, Joseph, Moses, Aaron, the whole Hebrew congregation at Mount Sinai, Samuel, Solomon, David, Jonah, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Elijah, Elisha, Jesus, Peter, Paul. It's a cavalcade of charismatics. The Bible is a menagerie of mystics. It's a parade of the parapsychological. It's both she's and man of shamans. It's a tremendous compendium of the mysterium tremendum. It's person after person of personal experience. The Bible is full of mysticism. So this week, I want to explore three mystics in history. And these three mystics can be exemplars to us. I want to speak of Giordano Bruno, Joan of Arc, and Howard Thurman. They can teach us something about mysticism. Giordano Bruno, he was born in 1548 in Naples, Italy. He was a brilliant mind early on, prodigious memory. He earned his PhD by his mid-20s. He entered the Dominican priesthood. He was well known as a teacher of great insight, and he had a mystical perception of the universe. He began to teach that the universe was infinite and that it was teeming with planets and with life. Remember, he's right after Copernicus, who had taught that the sun is the center of the universe, not the earth. But for Bruno, in an infinite universe, there is no center. There's many suns and there's life and planets everywhere. It was this mystical vision. In the year 1600, they burned him on the stake. They paraded him into Rome on a donkey, killed him, and dumped his body in the Tiber River because of his vision of an infinite universe. I'm using him as an example first to remind us that the institutional church often finds mystics to be dangerous. They're sort of a wild card. The institutional church tends to want to have the authority to say what to believe, but a mystic might say back, well, that's not my experience. That's not what I feel. One of the great cardinals in the church said, well, he sort of snarled, that mysticism, it begins in mist and ends in schism. Mysticism is a wild card, and it does need to be bridled by good theology, like a wild stallion. Mysticism needs to be wrapped with good theology, but the church has been too quick to lash out against mystics. I'm also speaking about Bruno because I think one's image of God can determine how mystically inclined you'll be or what chance you'll have for a mystical experience. You see, the traditional image of God is called theism, and it tends to think of God as sort of this big person out there. But the church has always taught that God is infinite, that God can't be a being alongside other beings. God can't be an object in the universe. Remember, in an infinite conception of God, the universe is an object within God, not the other way around. And so someone like Bruno comes to a different notion of God, a panentheistic notion, that God is not a being alongside other beings. God is being itself, reality itself, and we live within God. Oh, panentheism can open your imagination and your heart to mystical experience. I also am bringing up Bruno because he can remind us of this war between science and religion. There never should have been a war. He was killed because of a notion of an infinite universe teeming with exoplanets, other planets that might have life. That could be good science now. But we've imagined somehow that religion can't embrace the best of scientific insults. It can. And I want to speak of mysticism as something we still should use good evidence-based reasoning when we consider mysticism. We don't turn our brains off when we talk about mysticism. Let me explain. When I used to live in California years ago, there was this woman that hung out at SeaWorld. She would hang out by the dolphin tank, and she said she could talk to the dolphins. Actually, even more than that the dolphins talked to her. So she would sort of channel what the dolphins were saying. And she would say things like, the dolphins want us to grow more daisies or have world peace. And everything she said the dolphins were saying struck me as so banal and cliche. And I thought, I love dolphins. I thought dolphins wouldn't say insipid things. They would be incisive and dynamic. And she always said these treacly, saccharine things. I don't really think she was channeling the dolphins. Just with evidence-based reasoning, I think it's unlikely. But wait, my friends. She was feeling some mystical connection to life. I might judge with evidence-based reasoning whether she was really talking to the dolphins, but I can't judge, nor should I, that deep subjective experience that she was having, feeling connected to other life forms, to the world. That's beautiful. Do you see the slight distinction? Okay, let's move from Giordano Bruno to Joan of Arc. When was the last time you thought of her? Joan of Arc, one of the great mystics, born in 1412 in a rural village in France. When she was 13 years old, she began to have visions. Visions of St. Michael, the archangel, St. Michael, St. Catherine, St. Margaret. And these saintly visions were telling her that Charles should be king. Remember, we're in the time of the 100 Years' War between England and France, a bitter scourge of a war. She somehow won an audience as a young woman with Charles and told him that she had visions, he should be king, and somehow she was given the permission to lead troops into battle, and she won these initial battles. Amazing story, but then she was captured by England, put on trial, and also burnt at the stake. I want us to think of Joan of Arc to see that often it's the most traditional form of religion that can generate mysticism. I think this is interesting. Joan of Arc was a devout Orthodox Roman Catholic. And so devout, in fact, she would take the Eucharist and take it in the battlefield even. And the sacraments were so important to her. I think this could teach us that the most traditional forms of religion, maybe especially so with their sacraments and their rituals, are sort of a platform to create a mystical experience. We so often think of traditional religion as something sort of formalized and officious and maybe a little boring. No, the traditional religions with their deep symbolic systems and rituals are priming you for the mystical. And now lastly, I want to talk of Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman was one of the great African-American religious leaders of the mid-20th century. He was born in 1899 in Daytona Beach, the son of a slave on a plantation. She had been a slave, and when he grew up, he showed a brilliant mind right away. He went to Haverford College at one point to study with Rufus Jones, the great Quaker mystic. Oh, you know the Quakers that believe in that inner light that will gather and sit in silence to access that light. Well, Howard Thurman had been a mystic since being a child. He had all these experiences in nature of experiencing the divine, standing by the ocean or taking hikes. He was a perfect example of a nature mystic. It almost seems like our country generates these nature mystics. We have such beautiful land. I'm thinking of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, and Howard Thurman was in that lineage. You see, it's nature. Well, listen, it's nature that can create a mystical experience. Sometimes people will come to me and say, I didn't go to church last week. They will feel guilty, and they say, I didn't go to church because I was on a hike in the prairie. And I usually say, that's wonderful. It's a great reason to miss church. You can commune with the Spirit in such a deep way in nature. So Howard Thurman was a nature mystic, but I'm using him as an example because he's also a mystic that was propelled into seeking justice. These two things go together. We often think of mysticism and justice work as somehow separate, but in fact, it's common that they go together. The mystic experiences this oneness with reality. Then in their heart, they want a more just society. They want to bring that sense of connection and rightness to others. It was Howard Thurman that wrote a book called Jesus and the Disinherited. He wrote about Jesus as this person in an ethnic minority being oppressed by larger powers in society. He wrote about Jesus essentially as a black man, and that Jesus was trying to attack our whole notion of enemy, that Jesus was about the dignity and respect we should give every person, and there should be no enemies, that you should love your enemy. It was Martin Luther King that discovered that book, and it propelled his whole ministry. Mystics and seeking justice go together. Well, I've used 3 examples to just describe mysticism. But remember, my friends, most importantly, I just want you to feel like a mystic. You have this light within you. I'm describing mysticism like it's some scholarly phenomenon. It's not. It's you, it's me. I hope that you feel at one with God today.